What if I told you that some of the most emotionally intelligent, deeply intuitive, and mysteriously powerful people you know were forged in the fires of childhood trauma? That their greatest strengths actually came from their deepest wounds? Today, we're diving into something most people won't talk about: how brutal childhoods don't just break some kids, they transform them into something extraordinary. We're talking about Sigma INFJs, and trust me, this isn't your typical personality type discussion. If you've ever felt like you see the world differently, like you understand people in ways that sometimes scare even yourself, or if you've wondered why you're so comfortable being alone yet so deeply connected to others' emotions, stick around. What you're about to learn might just explain everything. 1. Understanding the Sigma INFJ. More than just a personality type. Let's start with the basics, but we're gonna go way deeper than those surface-level personality quizzes you've seen online. The INFJ, that's introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging, is already the rarest personality type, making up less than 2% of the population. But when you add the Sigma element, we're talking about something even more unique. See, most people think of personality types as these neat little boxes. But here's the thing: trauma doesn't care about your box. It reshapes everything, and sometimes it creates something that doesn't fit any standard category. A Sigma INFJ isn't just introverted, they're selectively social. They don't avoid people because they're shy, they choose their connections with laser precision. They've learned, often the hard way, that not everyone deserves access to their inner world. These individuals carry what I call earned wisdom. Insights that come not from books or classes, but from surviving experiences that would break many others. They've been forced to develop emotional intelligence as a survival mechanism, and the result is someone who can read a room, understand motivations, and see through facades with almost supernatural accuracy. But here's what's really fascinating: they don't use these abilities to manipulate or control. Instead, they become these quiet guardians, protectors of the vulnerable, champions of the underdog. Because they remember what it felt like to need someone who understood. 2. The dark origins, when childhood becomes a battlefield. Now, let's talk about something that's hard to discuss but absolutely crucial to understand: the brutal childhoods that often shape Sigma INFJs. We're not talking about minor disappointments or typical growing pains. We're talking about serious trauma, emotional neglect, psychological abuse, family dysfunction, violence, addiction in the home, or being forced to grow up way too fast. Picture this scenario, and unfortunately, it's all too common. A sensitive, intuitive child grows up in a home where emotions are weapons, where love is conditional, where they learn that the adults who are supposed to protect them can't even protect themselves. These kids don't have the luxury of normal childhood development. Instead, they become emotional detectives, constantly scanning for danger, reading micro-expressions, learning to predict mood swings and outbursts. They develop what researchers call hypervigilance. But unlike PTSD hypervigilance that focuses on external threats, theirs becomes emotionally focused. They learn to feel what others are feeling before those people even know it themselves. It's not a gift, it's a survival skill. When dad's about to explode, when mom's about to have another breakdown, when the family's about to implode again, these kids need to know first so they can brace for impact or try to prevent it. The brutal irony? This survival mechanism, born from trauma, eventually becomes their superpower. But the cost is enormous. 3. The Alchemy of Pain. How trauma forges extraordinary abilities. Here's where things get really interesting and honestly, pretty mind-blowing. The human brain is incredibly adaptive, especially during childhood. When a developing mind is forced to cope with intense emotional chaos, it doesn't just survive, it evolves. Neuroscience shows us that trauma can actually enhance certain cognitive abilities. The constant stress of an unpredictable environment forces the brain to develop enhanced pattern recognition, improved emotional processing, and what some researchers call accelerated maturity. For the future Sigma INFJ, this means developing abilities that most people don't acquire until much later in life, if ever. They learn to read body language like a native language, detect deception with startling accuracy, understand complex emotional dynamics, see the bigger picture in human relationships. They develop an almost prophetic sense of how situations will unfold. But here's the kicker. They also develop something else, an unshakable sense of independence. When you can't rely on the adults in your life, you learn to rely on yourself. When the people who should love you unconditionally love you with strings attached, you learn that the most reliable relationship is the one you have with yourself. This isn't narcissism or selfishness. It's hard-earned self-reliance. It's knowing that you can survive anything because you already have. 4. The invisible armor. How Sigma INFJs protect themselves. One of the most fascinating aspects of Sigma INFJs is how they protect themselves while still remaining emotionally available to others. It's like they've developed this invisible armor, permeable enough to let genuine connection in, but strong enough to keep manipulation and toxicity out. This armor has several layers. The first is what I call selective vulnerability. Unlike typical INFJs who might be emotional open books, Sigma INFJs have learned to share strategically. They'll be incredibly supportive and understanding with others, but they reveal their own depths only to those who've truly earned that trust. The second layer is emotional compartmentalization. They can feel deeply for others without taking on their pain as their own. This isn't coldness, it's wisdom. They've learned the difference between empathy and emotional fusion, often because they had to in order to survive their childhood environment. The third layer is what I call strategic isolation. When things get overwhelming or when they sense toxicity, they can disappear. Not permanently, not cruelly, but completely. They'll ghost situations that threaten their peace, and they won't feel guilty about it. They've learned that their energy is precious and not everyone deserves access to it. This might sound cold to some people, but it's actually incredibly healthy. Most empaths never learn these skills and they burn out. Sigma INFJs, forged by trauma, learned early that self-preservation isn't selfish, it's necessary. 5. The paradox of connection. Deeply understanding others while remaining mysterious. Here's something that blows people's minds about Sigma INFJs. They can understand you better than you understand yourself, but good luck figuring them out. This paradox stems directly from their traumatic backgrounds. When you grow up having to understand dangerous or unpredictable people to survive, you become incredibly skilled at reading others. You learn to see past the masks, the defenses, the lies people tell themselves. But at the same time, you learn to wear your own mask expertly. Not because you're deceptive, but because you've learned that showing your true self to the wrong person can be dangerous. So you become this fascinating contradiction, incredibly transparent about universal human experiences while remaining mysteriously private about your personal ones. They'll tell you exactly what you need to hear to heal, grow, or succeed. They'll see your potential when you can't see it yourself. They'll understand your pain even when you can't articulate it. But ask them about their own struggles, their own dreams, their own fears. That's different territory entirely. This creates an interesting dynamic in relationships. People are often drawn to Sigma INFJs because they feel seen and understood in ways they've never experienced before. But then they realize they don't really know much about the person who seems to know everything about them. It's not manipulation, it's protection. When you've been hurt by people who used your vulnerabilities against you, you learn to be very careful about what you reveal and to whom. 6. The transformation process. From victim to victor. The journey from traumatized child to Sigma INFJ isn't automatic or easy. It requires what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. The process of not just surviving trauma but actually becoming stronger because of it. This transformation usually happens in stages. First, there's the survival stage, just making it through each day, developing coping mechanisms, learning to navigate the chaos. This is where many of those crucial skills develop, but it's also where a lot of pain gets buried. Then comes the recognition stage, usually in adolescence or early adulthood, where they start to realize that their experience wasn't normal, that they've developed abilities others don't have, and that they have choices about how to use their painful experiences. The integration stage is where the real magic happens. This is where they consciously choose to transform their survival skills into strengths, their pain into purpose, their wounds into wisdom. They don't just survive their trauma, They alchemize it into something powerful and useful. Finally, there's what I call the wounded healer stage. This is where many Sigma INFJs find their calling, using their hard-earned wisdom to help others, whether through formal helping professions, creative expression, or just being that person others turn to when life gets tough. The beautiful thing about this transformation is that it's genuine. Unlike people who might fake depth or wisdom, Sigma INFJs have earned theirs through real struggle and real growth. 7. The gifts born from ashes. Unique strengths of Sigma INFJs. Let's talk about the incredible gifts that can emerge from these difficult beginnings. And I want to be clear, I'm not romanticizing trauma. Trauma is terrible, and no child should have to endure it. But when someone does survive it and transform it, the results can be extraordinary. First, there's their intuitive accuracy. It's almost scary how often Sigma INFJs can predict how situations will unfold, how people will react, or what someone really needs to hear. This isn't psychic ability, it's pattern recognition on steroids, developed through years of having to read people and situations for survival. Second, they have what I call emotional X-ray vision. They can see through pretense, manipulation, and emotional games because they've been exposed to all of it before. They're not cynical, they're realistic. They can spot genuine people just as easily as they can spot fake ones. Third, they possess incredible emotional resilience. Not because they don't feel pain, they actually feel it more deeply than most, but because they've learned how to process it, learn from it, and move forward. They've developed what researchers call anti-fragility, the ability to get stronger from stress rather than just survive it. Fourth, they have an unusual capacity for unconditional positive regard. Because they know what it's like to be judged, rejected, or misunderstood, they can offer others a kind of acceptance that's rare and healing. They don't judge people for their struggles because they've had their own. Finally, they often develop what I call purposeful living. Having survived real adversity, they don't waste time on trivial concerns. They tend to focus on what really matters: deep relationships, meaningful work, personal growth, and making a positive impact. 8. The dark side, when transformation isn't complete. But let's be honest, not everyone who experiences childhood trauma becomes a healthy Sigma INFJ. Sometimes the transformation gets stuck, and instead of growth, you get destructive patterns. Some become what I call wounded warriors, people who use their insights and abilities to hurt others rather than help them. They might become master manipulators, using their emotional intelligence for personal gain rather than genuine connection. Others become emotional vampires, so hungry for the love and validation they never received as children that they drain everyone around them. They might use their understanding of others to create dependency rather than growth. Some get stuck in victim identity, where their trauma becomes their entire personality. They might use their difficult past as an excuse for poor behavior or as a way to manipulate others' sympathy. And then there are those who become emotional fortresses, so protected that they can't let anyone in, even people who genuinely care about them. They might help others heal while never allowing themselves to be vulnerable enough to heal fully. The difference between these outcomes and healthy Sigma INFJs often comes down to one crucial factor: the ability to take responsibility for their healing while still acknowledging the validity of their pain. 9. The healing journey. How Sigma INFJs continue to grow. Even healthy Sigma INFJs are usually on a continuous healing journey. The transformation from trauma to strength isn't a one-time event, it's an ongoing process. Many find that their healing happens in layers. Just when they think they've processed everything, life brings up new situations that trigger old wounds or reveal new areas that need attention. But here's what's beautiful about Sigma INFJs: they don't run from this process. They embrace it. They often become students of their own psyche, fascinated by human nature and psychology, not just in others but in themselves. They might engage in therapy, but they're usually the kind of clients therapists love because they do the work. They don't just want to feel better, they want to understand why they felt bad in the first place. They're drawn to practices that promote self-awareness, meditation, journaling, creative expression, deep conversations with trusted friends. They understand that healing isn't about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't happen. It's about integrating those experiences in a way that serves their growth. Many also find healing through helping others. There's something powerful about using your pain to prevent or heal someone else's. It creates meaning from suffering, which is one of the most powerful forms of healing available to humans. 10. Relationships and the Sigma INFJ. Love in the time of trauma. Romantic relationships can be particularly complex for Sigma INFJs. On one hand, they have an incredible capacity for deep, meaningful connection. They understand love in ways that can be almost overwhelming for partners who aren't used to that level of emotional intelligence and intuition. But on the other hand, their trauma history can create challenges. They might struggle with trust, even when their partner has done nothing to earn distrust. They might have a hard time believing that someone could love them without ulterior motives. They might test relationships unconsciously, pushing partners away to see if they'll stay. The partners who work best with Sigma INFJs are usually those who appreciate depth over superficiality, who value emotional intelligence, and who understand that some people carry invisible scars that affect how they love and receive love. What's beautiful is when a Sigma INFJ finds someone who sees their trauma history not as damage but as evidence of their strength. Someone who understands that their protective mechanisms aren't personal rejection but hard-earned wisdom about what healthy relationships look like. In friendships, Sigma INFJs tend to have few but incredibly deep connections. They're not interested in surface-level social interactions. They want to know what makes you tick, what keeps you up at night, what you dream about when no one's watching. And in return, they'll offer the kind of loyalty and understanding that can be life-changing. 11. The professional life. How Sigma INFJs change the world. In their professional lives, Sigma INFJs often gravitate toward fields where they can use their emotional intelligence and insight to make a real difference. You'll find them as therapists, counselors, writers, artists, social workers, teachers, coaches, and in various healing professions. But what's interesting is that they often approach these careers differently than others might. They're not just doing a job. They're on a mission. Their work often feels like a calling because it's connected to their own healing journey and transformation. They tend to be the professionals who see clients as whole human beings rather than just problems to solve. They're the teachers who can reach troubled students because they understand what it's like to struggle. They're the managers who can bring out the best in difficult employees because they see potential where others see problems. Many also become entrepreneurs, creating businesses or organizations that reflect their values and their desire to make a positive impact. They're drawn to work that feels meaningful and aligned with their purpose. What sets them apart in professional settings is their combination of emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and genuine care for others. They can navigate complex organizational politics while staying true to their values. They can make tough decisions while still considering the human impact. 12. The spiritual dimension. Finding meaning in the madness. Many Sigma INFJs develop a deep spiritual dimension to their lives, though it might not look like traditional religiosity. Their traumatic experiences often force them to grapple with big questions about meaning, purpose, suffering, and the nature of human existence. Some find comfort in organized religion, particularly traditions that emphasize compassion, forgiveness, and service to others. Others create their own spiritual framework, drawing from various traditions and philosophies that resonate with their experience. What's common among most Sigma INFJs is a belief that suffering can be transformed into something meaningful. They often develop what Viktor Frankl called tragic optimism, the ability to maintain hope and find meaning even in the face of unavoidable suffering. This spiritual dimension often becomes a source of strength and resilience. It helps them make sense of their experiences and find purpose in their pain. It also often drives their desire to help others and make a positive impact in the world. 13. The Sigma INFJ in society. Quiet revolutionaries. Sigma INFJs often become what I call quiet revolutionaries. They're not usually the ones leading protests or making speeches, but they're often behind the scenes, creating real change through their work, relationships, and influence. They have a unique ability to see systemic problems and understand their root causes, often because they've experienced the effects of those systems firsthand. They understand how childhood trauma perpetuates cycles of dysfunction. They see how emotional neglect creates adults who struggle with relationships. They recognize how societal pressures can crush sensitive individuals. But instead of just complaining about these problems, they work to solve them. They become the therapists who heal trauma, the teachers who see potential in struggling students, the leaders who create psychologically safe workplaces, the parents who break generational cycles of dysfunction. Their impact is often subtle but profound. They change lives one person at a time, and those people go on to impact others. It's a ripple effect that can ultimately touch thousands of lives. The science behind the transformation. Recent research in neuroscience and trauma psychology supports what many Sigma INFJs have experienced firsthand, that the brain's response to childhood trauma can actually enhance certain capabilities. Studies on neuroplasticity show that early adversity can lead to accelerated development in areas of the brain responsible for emotional processing, pattern recognition, and stress adaptation. This doesn't mean trauma is good. It means the human brain is remarkably adaptive and can sometimes create extraordinary abilities as a response to extraordinary challenges. Research on post-traumatic growth has identified specific factors that determine whether someone becomes stronger after trauma or remains stuck in its effects. These include the ability to make meaning from suffering, the development of spiritual beliefs, the cultivation of supportive relationships, and the recognition of personal strength and resilience. Sigma INFJs seem to naturally develop many of these factors, possibly because their intuitive nature and emotional intelligence help them process their experiences in healing ways. Conclusion: the Phoenix Rising. So here we are, at the end of our deep dive into one of psychology's most fascinating phenomena, how brutal childhoods can create extraordinary human beings. The Sigma INFJ represents something profound about human resilience and adaptability. They're living proof that we don't have to be defined by what happens to us. We can be defined by how we respond to what happens to us. Their journey from trauma to transformation isn't easy, and it's not something I'd wish on anyone. Every Sigma INFJ would probably trade their hard-earned wisdom for a peaceful, loving childhood. But since they can't change their past, they've chosen to transform it into something powerful and purposeful. What can we learn from their example? First, that healing is possible, even from severe trauma. Second, that our greatest strengths often emerge from our deepest struggles. Third, that it's possible to use our pain to help others heal. And finally, that the human spirit has an incredible capacity for growth, transformation, and resilience. If you recognize yourself in this description, know that your journey matters. Your struggles have meaning. Your sensitivity is a gift, not a weakness. Your ability to understand and help others is rare and valuable. The world needs what you have to offer, not despite your difficult past, but because of how you've transformed it. And if you know someone who fits this description, treat them with the respect and appreciation they deserve. They've earned their wisdom through real struggle. They've developed their abilities through real adversity. They're not just another personality type. They're wounded healers, quiet revolutionaries, and living examples of the human capacity for transformation. The phoenix doesn't rise in spite of the fire, it rises because of it. And that's exactly what Sigma INFJs represent, the beautiful, powerful possibility of transformation that exists within each of us, even in our darkest moments. Remember, trauma might be where their story began, but transformation is where they chose to take it. And that choice, that conscious decision to grow rather than just survive, that's what makes all the difference.